Wingardium Leviosa. Fantastic Beasts Part 3, The Secrets of Dumbledore. I don't think I've seen any movie in the last few years that has been more determined, more laser-focused, more absolutely dead set on screwing itself over than this one. The sheer metric ton of crap that had piled on top of this thing before it even premiered, you almost have to be impressed. To have that much working against you when you've got an IP as beloved as this one, I have no idea how that happened. But it's fascinating. Seriously, how did we get here? As I was driving to the theater, this weird thought suddenly occurred to me. I don't think I've even watched the trailers for this movie. That's how little I cared. And I barely remember the last one. And this is for a movie in the Harry Potter franchise. That was like the biggest thing in pop culture once upon a time. But in the last few years, this Fantastic Beasts spin-off has gotten a lot more famous for all the controversies surrounding it. So many controversies that I had to make a list. First, Johnny Depp. They cast him as the big bad Grindelwald. He plays the character in the first two movies until he finds himself in a sticky domestic abuse situation with she who shall not be named. Then, the studio, in their infinite wisdom, sides with Johnny Depp's abuser instead of him, kicks him out of the franchise, they recast the part, and now the movie is premiering at the same time as Johnny Depp taking you-know-who to court, and, from what I hear, is quickly exposing her as an abusive piece of human garbage for all the world to see. Looks like vindication for Johnny Depp, but not so much for Warner Brothers, who may have acted a bit hastily when they cut ties with him. Then there's the Ezra Miller situation. He's also got a notable part in these movies, and in this case, for some reason, the studio went and made the opposite decision, choosing to keep him in the franchise despite him becoming a flight risk the likes of which a young Robert Downey Jr. would have been humbled by. As if Miller getting caught on video trying to strangle some girl a couple years ago wasn't bad enough, now, coinciding with the release of the movie, he's gotten himself into more trouble, getting arrested, making death threats to people, just acting like a fucking nutcase in general, and who the hell knows what else. So he's still in there, but Johnny Depp, that guy they fired. Brilliant. Then there's J.K. Rowling, who it turns out has been making noise with some pretty controversial opinions about the transgender community that she just can't seem to keep to herself, and her name just happens to be all over this thing. She created the franchise, co-wrote the script, she's listed as a producer, so her views might as well be the movie's also, which is not a great look any way you spin it. And then there's the movie itself, which is following Part 2, a sequel a lot of fans weren't crazy about, and is the first one in the series to shine a light on the Dumbledore-Grindelwald LGBT romance, which probably shouldn't be a hard sell in this day and age, but it kind of is, at least for a movie like this. And if that wasn't enough, all this is compounding on a movie series that hadn't exactly set the world on fire to begin with. The first one was decent enough, I guess, but Part 2 was muddled and confusing, and there were a lot of characters that didn't make much of an impression, and blah blah blah, and they've made enough money for WB to keep cranking these things out so far, but if the studio was hoping for another Harry Potter-like phenomenon, Fantastic Beasts has fallen a little bit short of the mark. So you've got one star who was fired when he shouldn't have been, which has created bad press for you, another star who wasn't fired when he should have been, which has created worse press for you, a creator who's flipping the bird to political correctness and saying, "Come at me, bro," a movie wherein your main hero and villain are involved in a gay romance, which, in what's considered a franchise for kids, young adults, or families, makes the marketing campaign kind of challenging, and all that when you're trying to promote the third installment in a series that there didn't seem to be much enthusiasm for in the first place. Also, we're still in a pandemic, which certainly doesn't help. Put everything together, and it's as if all the stars had aligned to create the perfect shitstorm in which to debut Fantastic Beasts Part 3. They would have had an easier time trying to sell people on Birds of Prey 2. God help this movie. So instead of a typical review, which I'll get to in a minute, first I want to go through this list and see how each thing affected the movie's chances, because frankly, all that stuff is more interesting than the movie itself. So Johnny Depp is out. So be it. He's trying to sort out his legal troubles with She Who Shall Not Be Named, and as I understand it, he's having a much better time in court than the movie is in theaters right now. Meanwhile, replacing him as Grindelwald is Mads Mikkelsen. Now, do I feel bad for Johnny Depp? Absolutely. He got completely screwed over. F*** you, WB, for firing him while standing by you-know-who, not to mention Ezra Miller, but just in terms of the movie and the Grindelwald character, this might be an unpopular opinion, but I kind of think Mikkelsen fits the part better. Johnny Depp, as good as he is too quirky. He's a little too out there for a character like this. I didn't really buy into him as this leader whose cause other evil wizards would rally behind, and I got the impression from part 2 that he didn't feel terribly inspired by the role anyway. Mads Mikkelsen is a different animal. He's got a different kind of charisma where he's menacing, but also a little more down to earth, a little more relatable, and he's very magnetic. I believe this is a guy who other wizards would want to throw their lot in with. With Depp's version, I wasn't too sure. Mikkelsen humanizes Grindelwald slightly, and to sell the storyline with Dumbledore especially, you are gonna need someone like that. So for what the character needs and what the story needs, I think Mikkelsen works better. That being said, I doubt anyone's gonna care. Sympathy for Johnny Depp is way up right now. Every time I log onto YouTube or social media, I see new videos or tweets or articles about how he's kicking you-know-who's ass in court, and it's all blowing up in her face, and Johnny's having his name cleared, and he's laughing as Fantastic Beasts burns itself to the ground, and the fans are laughing right along with him or whatever. So the recasting might have made for a better movie, but I don't think a better movie is what people care about right now. Next, Ezra Miller. Jesus Christ, this fucking guy. He gets himself in trouble again right when the movie is about to drop. You couldn't have timed this any worse. It's almost as if he did it on purpose. Now, Warner Brothers couldn't have predicted that, but they sure as hell could have kicked this jackass to the curb a couple years ago after that video made the rounds of him trying to strangle some girl, to say nothing of all his other bizarre behavior. A blind person could see this guy is not all there mentally, but the studio chose to keep him, to not punish him or get him any kind of help, and look where that got them. Part 2 literally ends on the cliffhanger of his character being played up as the big immediate threat of the next installment, and just when you've got people thinking he's an integral part of the movie, he shits the bed as a human being, making downplaying his importance the only sane thing to do. And I'll try not to spoil it too much, but it definitely looks like there were some big pivots being made here. I don't know if this was always the plan or if the story had to be changed late in the process, but Ezra Miller is not in this movie that much. It's actually funny how small of a role he plays here. He's highlighted in one major sequence, but other than that, he's a side character for most of it. His character is talked about by other people, it just usually happens when he's off screen. And with the way the movie ends, they definitely gave themselves an out where they have the option of bringing him back for part 4 if part 4 even happens, but if they don't want to, they don't have to, and it won't hurt the story to lose the character. Like, this could serve as his exit, and it would work narratively. So Damage Control did about as much as could be done here if the studio wasn't gonna cut the cord on Miller, and I don't think the final product suffered for it that much, but that doesn't mean it wasn't an awkward transition. And I still think they would have been better off just firing him a couple years ago and recasting the role, because Miller even being in there at all is a tension this movie can do without. J.K. Rowling? Look, there's no getting around her association with this thing, but they did seem to try to mitigate her involvement slightly. She had a co-writer on the script this time. I wish they'd gotten someone other than Steve Kloves. I had quite a few issues with his Harry Potter adaptations, but it is what it is. This script is more coherent than part 2 was, at least. It's more focused, it has a better idea of what it wants to do, love it or hate it, but it does have a lot of the same problems. I'll get to those in the review portion. For me, the biggest issue with the script here is that for the first time, it felt like Rowling was running out of ideas. This reads like a script that was written at a time when Rowling was watching a lot of cable news. Way too much cable news. The timelines might not match up exactly, but I can just picture her brainstorming the story for this one while she's got MSNBC on in the background with Rachel Maddow and Chris Hayes and Brian Williams or whoever their UK equivalents are, going on and on and on about one thing in particular. And thus, we have a fantasy movie in the Harry Potter universe that's literally about a corrupt politician trying to rig an election. Wow, I wonder where Rowling could have gotten that idea from. And you too, Clovis. I suspect you're not exactly blameless here. I mean, I guess we have to expect a certain amount of social commentary in pretty much everything these days, but holy gods! I don't know what I wanted from this movie, but something I could watch a news anchor explain to me wasn't it, and even the execution of it has no imagination. With the actual election itself in the climax, if you take out the magic spells and the fantastic beasts, there's not really that much differentiating it from a typical political thriller. It's the fantasy equivalent of a fraudulent vote count, which, I don't know about you guys, but that's not what I go to movies like this for. So yeah, the increasingly controversial J.K. Rowling being so involved with the movie was gonna be an issue, but the bigger issue, in my opinion, is that the story she came up with wasn't anywhere near the kick in the pants the franchise needed after the lackluster Part 2, or, quite frankly, what most people are looking for in their escapist fantasy either. Then we've got the LGBT factor. It was hinted at in the last movie, now it's all on the table that in their youth, Dumbledore and Grindelwald had been in love. Even in 2022, that's not gonna be everybody's cup of tea, so it's kind of bold that the studio was even willing to do this, or so you'd think. But sure enough, it's in there, technically, but it's all very sanitized, the actual romance happened years in the past, and it's talked about in a few scenes, it's hinted at in some body language very briefly, but not surprisingly, it's mostly explored in bits that could be very easily cut out for certain international releases without really losing anything. Like, you could cut pretty much all the LGBT-related stuff and the story would be, I'd say, 95% intact. So they're trying to have their cake and eat it too, just like Disney, but it doesn't work that way. People are smarter than this now, and they're gonna call you out when you pull bullshit like this. So, yay for the people wanting representation, I suppose, but at the same time, Warner Brothers chickened out with it and went the safe route because they like money more than any virtues or values they claim to espouse. So some people may be put off by it being in there at all, other people will be annoyed that it's not in there enough, and the studio look like hypocrites for taking the stuff out when the movie plays in other countries. So in their efforts to find a comfy middle ground on this issue, Warner Brothers may have wound up with an LGBT storyline that manages to please absolutely no one. So the movie already had a ton of strikes against it. It was gonna be really hard to salvage this thing, but it might have been possible if at least the movie itself was really good. Unfortunately, the best they could do was a resounding meh. The direction, music, acting, that stuff is fine. If you put a gun to my head, I might say it's better than Part 2 just because the story flows better, but a lot of the problems have carried over. A big thing that stands out here, and it was a problem with the last one too, is that there are a lot of characters that are just not very memorable, make little to no impression, and don't seem to be that necessary either. Throughout the movie, you see multiple characters going off on their own little side stories or subplots that don't amount to very much, if anything, and feel like they only exist in the first place because those characters needed something to do. The first Fantastic Beasts had a nice core group of 4 main characters. Not as good as the Harry Potter trio or anything, but they were likable enough and each one had a role that mattered. Now we've more than doubled that number and everyone feels a lot less important. I had trouble even remembering who all these people were, and now the previous leads are in supporting roles along with a bunch of others, or in one case barely in the movie at all, so the story can shift to the new leads and the whole thing is starting to feel really unfocused. A lot of these characters don't seem to serve any actual purpose, they just need to go away. The story was clearly chafing under the weight of all of them, and it was already having enough trouble just trying to keep the narrative from derailing itself. The whole story about Grindelwald and the rigged election feels incredibly flimsy, and there are so many holes in it. In the last movie, this guy was the biggest criminal in the wizarding world, and now he's what? running for wizard president or something? Some kind of political office that I didn't even know was a thing until this movie? That's pretty damn hard to swallow. I thought the Minister of Magic was the highest office, but now there's one that's way above that? When did this become a thing? Beats me. Maybe Rowling just didn't have a story? Maybe she's making it up as she goes along? Maybe she was getting too much inspiration from real-world politics? Maybe Steve Clovis had too much input? Either way, this was not what the movie needed to be. The social commentary was unwelcome, there were way too many things that didn't make sense or didn't need to be there at all, and even the stuff that turned out to be good had kind of a negative stigma attached to it because the studio couldn't get its head out of its ass. And I just had to roll my eyes at the climax because they had the perfect opportunity to wrap the story up. Most of the plot threads were concluded. They could have ended the whole thing right there and it would have been fitting, but then they just had to bait us with more sequels that I doubt fans are even gonna want after this one. They just couldn't resist, but I don't know where else they can take the story now. They were reaching way too damn hard just to come up with a story for this movie. And considering how the box office is shaping up for the weekend as I'm shooting this video, this may have been their last chance to right the ship before people just stopped caring. So seeing as how all these things working against this franchise aren't likely to get much better in the future, and the law of diminishing returns is already working its magic on Part 3, maybe it's time Warner Brothers pulls the plug on Fantastic Beasts and either goes back to Harry Potter or finds a new franchise that comes with less baggage. Thanks for watching, everybody. While you're here, let me know what you thought about the Secrets of Dumbledore down below. Ding that bell icon and follow my social media so you can always be notified when I upload new stuff. I'm doing weekly streams for Moon Knight right now, so check out the live streaming channel for those. The links are all down there. And most importantly, don't forget to hit that thumbs up, share the video, subscribe, and make sure you're still subscribed, because what really deserves to take the Avada Kedavra curse from a power-hungry evil wizard politician is the YouTube algorithm. That's all for now, but I'll be back with more soon, so stay tuned for that, do all the YouTube things, and I'll see you next time.